Okay, so this is not scripted. My last video was scripted. This one won't be scripted because this video is going to be a little bit scatterbrained. However, I do want to focus on some of the stuff on the right of the picture first, because a lot of this stuff relates to my previous theory. I would recommend going and watching my most recent theory video. It talks about a concept I call the roaring delta. And it also talks a little bit about Snowgrave as well, because I just wanted to talk about like the inspirations behind the Snowgrave story, what I think are the inspirations behind that story. Um, so apart from that, I would just want to get into this new video. So to summarize the Roaring Delta, my theory is that the Roaring Knight, is not working alone. He is working with two other associates. And my theory for who these associates were a figure I called the Roaring Rook, and this would be Kris, and another figure known as the Roaring Bishop. And this is who I would call the person on the phone with Kris during the events of Chapter 4. So, with that being said, I want to discuss that a little bit more because I did a little bit more speculation, and I think I know what the knight is now. So, if we're contrasting this against the Delta Warriors, right? If we want to contrast this against the Delta Warriors were a human, a monster, and a prince from the dark. A human, a monster, and a darkner. So, if that's the case, would the Roaring Delta also be a human, a monster, and a darkner? Let's discuss it. So, I want to bring up Gerson Boom. We know from Gerson Boom that the process of making darkners can essentially bring people back from the dead. The only problem is they'll be locked to the dark world because they're, as Rousey says, not real. So, Gerson Boom, of course, his hammer was brought into Alvin's office, and so when the church became a dark world, Gerson Boom was brought back to life. Is this the process that brings all darkners to life? Could be. It could be. I don't know how I feel about like weird stuff. Like, if that's the case, then some monster's dust was sprinkled over the library trash can, and that's how trashy exists. So, like, I don't know if I'd go to the extent that that's how all darkners are born. However, that is a possibility I'm leaving open. It could also be that darkners are made from monster DNA. So if a monster's DNA is on an object, like say maybe Azrael's DNA was on Kris's like little devil horns, that like Kris had for Halloween one year. Would that then become Rousey because it had Azrael's DNA? Maybe. But I want to focus on this idea of the Dark World bringing the items with monster dust on them to life. Monster funerals, the dust is sprinkled over their favorite object, and then that object is put somewhere where a dark fountain is created. So, as you can see, my first math equation here, I guess, is dead monster plus the item their dust gets sprinkled on plus a dark fountain equals that darkner existing now. So let's apply this to the knight. Now, we know of one Deltarune character who has gone missing and who is a very suspicious candidate for the night, this would be Des. And I was heavily considering this, but I think the thing that really made me realize this was that the knight's sword, when the knight begins his battle in chapter 3, his sword, like, for a frame, looks like a baseball bat. And that's interesting to me. It might just be the way Toby decided to draw the sword, but we do know that Des was connected to this baseball bat. Des had a baseball bat, which she used to, like, smack sense into people who were giving her sister a hard time, I guess. So, baseball bat plus the dust from Des's soul could equal the Roaring Knight. Now, more evidence for the Roaring Knight being a Darkner. King says he hates Lightners. Like, he makes it clear he hates Lightners. So if he saw if the Roaring Knight was a Lightner, King probably wouldn't submit to him. He'd probably be like, oh, get out of here with your Lightner garbage. We don't like the Lightners no mo. But if the knight is a Darkner, it would make more sense why King was willing to trust him. It would. So in that case, who would have the motivation to rise Des from the dead? Well, I think the most reasonable candidate would be her mother, Carol Holiday. So let's say, for the sake of argument, Carol found out how to make these dark worlds. Let's also say, for the sake of argument, that because Kris was like a neighbor kid that Carol trusted a lot more than like other neighbor kids because of the closeness of the Holiday and Dreamner family, perhaps Carol is coercing Kris, that's a bit of a tongue twister, into doing her bidding to bring Des back from the dead. Now, here's the thing. If the knight is Des, then, of course, Des has already been brought back from the dead. But because of the divide between the light worlds and the dark worlds, because of the divide between reality and fiction, it's not the same. It's not the same! And so, perhaps, this roaring that the knight is setting to put in place, perhaps this is the event that would cause Darkners to become real. This is the event which... Okay, so I guess just use your imagination for this. Let's imagine, for the sake of the argument, and like there might be some more evidence for this, but I'm not going to get too far into this evidence. I just think this is a cool thought. What if the light world is physically on top of the dark world? Let's say that. Then let's say the chaos of the Neo-Dark Fountains brings forth the Titans. The Titans dig upwards, and they weaken, I guess you could say, the pillars of the earth. The Titans dig upwards to weaken the foundation of the earth, and the light world falls inside of the dark world. Let's say that's what the roaring is. This would be an apocalyptic event which would tear apart what we know about reality and drag everyone down into like this deep, deep darkness. It would be too chaotic, so the Darkners wouldn't even belong in this state of chaos, so they'd turn to stone. And then the Lightners just would not be able to understand what's going on. They might not be even able to see down there. And so it's really not a good state for anyone. But let's assume this is what Carol's trying to bring in place because she misses her daughter so much. Crazy. Crazy shit. So I have thought about this. I have thought about pairing the three characters of the Roaring Delta to these different chess pieces, and the the Delta Warriors already match chess pieces very well. So Kris would of course be the rook, because Kris is kind of a part of both of these factions. Um, Susie would be the knight, the warrior, right? And Rousey would be the bishop, the religious healer, basically. Um, with that, there might be another way to understand chess theory. Now, there was an old version of chess theory that the main boss of each world was supposed to represent a chess piece, which would like descend in point value. And I guess you could make the argument that Tenna does have some similarities to a rook, because he only moves like from side to side through a room. He never goes like up or down in a room. He like drops in from the ceiling and then goes like left or right. You'll never see him going like north. You only see him going east, west, or up and down. You'll never see him going north or south. So, I mean, with that, you could see Tenna as a version of a rook, but I'd like to think of this new version of chess theory. So we've just discussed the knight, rook, and bishop, and then of course you'd have the pawns, which would be the Castletown recruits for the light side, and any servant of the night for the dark side. Um, which you could also say the Titans are the pawns of the night. In this case, there might be a king and queen, or maybe even just a monarch, which represents both king and queen, for each side. Of course, Noel, we have discussed the Angels Delta, sort of a parallel to the Holy Trinity. Definitely its own thing, but with some symbolism and some similarities. Um, Noel would then be the monarch of the light side, along with the player. Um, so I guess you could see them as sort of a king and queen duo, but for the other side, this is where it gets interesting because we do not know anything about Gaster, and I'm going to tell you right now, we're bringing up the Undertale boogeyman. Gaster would be the monarch of the dark side of the chessboard. Now, with Gaster, we know very little about him, but given entry number 17, it sounds like he fell into a dark world. Uh, Photon readings negative. Photon readings would mean like photons are light, so there being negative light somewhere, being darker than dark. This is what the dark worlds are described as. So of course, it would make sense that Gaster would fall into his creation. Gaster would fall in to a dark world he created. Okay? Okay. From then on, we do not know Gaster's motivations. However, it is very possible he was the one on the phone with Spampton. And one thing we do know is that he is associated with the number 666. He is, to some extent. His fun room is fun room 66, and I believe there's something about like his game music being slowed down to 666 or something. I'm not sure, but people have looked at that and they've said they've seen a lot of devil imagery in Gaster. Now that being said, we also see a lot of devil symbolism with Kris, right? So, of course, there's the apple motif. There's that. There's the little devil horns that Kris wore for Halloween and stuff. And it really seems that when you look at the Dreamer and Holiday families, you get one kid who is like an angelic kid, and then the other kid who is like a devilish kid, to some extent. So like Azrael, he's like the choir boy. He's like the little religious boy who sings at choir practice and stuff like that. And then you have Kris, who is like sort of a prankster, I guess, dressing up like Icy and stuff to scare Noel, um, and summoning demons with her good friend Caddy with an eye. So you kind of get that imagery between Kris and Azrael. However, uh, in the first two chapters, we didn't know a lot about Des. In chapters 3 and 4, it seems like Des is actually being given some of this devil imagery. It's definitely to a more subtle extent. But, of course, she likes rock and roll, which rock and roll is not necessarily demonic. I mean, there's such a thing as religious rock, but you know, there's sort of the rock music aspect, and it's clear that like Toriel doesn't like the rocker lifestyle or something. So I mean, like that could tie into it. Um, Basically, Des would sort of be the dark version of Noel, basically, and so that makes this kind of interesting, right? If you have these two families with two kids, one kid in the family is very nice and very pure and very sweet, and the other one is kind of like a rowdy prankster type figure. Um, and then you'd have them on like opposite sides of this chessboard, right? I forgot where I was going with this and why it tied into Gaster again. This is unscripted. Um, I guess it's just interesting to talk about. So my guess would be that Gaster is the monarch of the dark side of the chessboard, and also that he'll be the final secret boss if that's the case. He might not be entwined in the main story at all, but if he is playing the chessboard, trying to make things like come out for like his benefit, then it might make sense why he's not part of the Roaring Delta, but he still has all this devil imagery to him. Yeah, yeah, no, no, I don't know. Just a thing to think about. Another thing I would like to talk about, it's basically confirmed that the player is the angel at this point. Um, it's basically confirmed. I mean, chapter 4. If you can play through chapter 4 and you just can't see the symbolism, I'm sorry, but like player angel theory basically confirmed. Um, I would also like to I would like to point out the characters of the Delta Warriors, like the three Delta Warriors. This is a small theory. This isn't like a big thing. This probably wasn't intentional, but it is just an observation that I noticed. Um, we've talked about in like previous episodes how there's a lot of like Jesus symbolism in the character of Noel, right? Um, when you actually look at the Delta Warriors, um, they seem to match the personalities of the closest three disciples. So, for those of you that don't know, Jesus had 12 disciples, um, but three of them in particular actually had a lot of focus. These were like the three closest. Um, these were Peter, James, and John. Um, James and John were referred to as the sons of thunder, and then Peter was just Peter. I took a look at the Delta Warriors personalities, and they actually seem to match these characters to an interesting extent. So I'll start with Susie, who would be closest in personality to Peter. Um, Peter was known for being very zealous. Zealous is basically like religious passion. Like you have a lot of passion for what you believe. That was basically like Peter's personality. Um, but of course, Peter also had some violent tendencies. Uh, for example, he like cut off a guy's ear. Uh, I'll explain that. I'll explain that more in detail later. Um, but yeah, he was very passionate. He was very like, but he was a little hot headed. Uh, because he was almost too passionate or like passionate in the wrong way, I guess. Um, yeah, okay. I'll just start by telling the ear story. The biggest example of this is as Jesus was getting arrested. Like there's a bunch of Romans there who were going to take him to his trial, I guess, quote unquote trial. It was anything but a sound legal judicial practice, but eh. Basically, when that happened, Peter like cut a guy's ear off, and then Jesus like healed it and said, "Peter, don't do that." Basically, and that's the type of person that I imagine Susie being. Susie is the type of person who would like just kind of like punch you with an axe if you diss their friends. Basically, that's the way I see Susie. Um, Rousey, I feel like parallels the character of John kind of well. So John was the beloved disciple, and John was also given the uh, revelation, like the revelation. Like at the end of the Bible, there's the book of Revelation. This is the revelation given to John, right? And this is basically the apocalypse. So he was kind of like the sweet one, the sweet and kind one who was like closest to Jesus, and he was also given the story of the apocalypse. And among the Delta Warriors, Rousey is the only one who has the apocalypse, right? He's the only one who knows the prophecy about the apocalypse, the roaring, as it's called in Deltarune. Um, and then Kris is actually kind of interesting because Kris, uh, Kris feels like a subversion of this mini theory. So the character of James would be the sibling of John, and of course, like Rousey isn't necessarily Kris's brother, but Rousey is meant to be like Azrael, right? So they're essentially sibling figures, I guess, in this. Um, we James is kind of the one who was a little bit more quiet than the other two. We have a book that James wrote, but it was more so like straightforward teaching than an indication of his particular personality. Um, however, you do get the idea that he's a lot more quiet than the other two. However, Kris seems to be a subversion of this, because we've discussed in the last episode that like, although Kris was chosen for the prophecy, they seem to be rejecting something. This can be evidenced by their name. This can be evidenced by how they resist the player's input. This can be represented by a lot of things. So this would essentially be a subversion of this, and Kris would actually be most comparable to Judas if you were to compare Kris to any of the disciples. Um, which is why they would actually be part of the Knights Roaring Delta, instead of the Angels Delta, um, of like Noel, the soul, and the player, basically. That's a mini theory. It doesn't have a lot of evidence. It really depends on how much of the story Toby is borrowing from Christianity, um, which is mostly visuals, probably. But I figured I would mention it. Also, more evidence for Susie being like a Peter type character. Um, when Peter was told a prophecy of what would happen, there is a story where Peter was told of a prophecy that would happen, and he said, "No, I won't let that happen." Essentially, Jesus said that he would have to be crucified, and then Peter said, "No, I won't let that happen." Basically, um, he said it very quickly with like a lot of passion behind it. Um, but he was told he was wrong, right? He was told off for that. And this actually kind of reminds me at the end of chapter 4 when Susie reads a prophecy that we, the player, don't get to read. And Susie just does not like it. Whatever Susie saw, she does not like it. And she said, "No, there is no way this is going to happen. I won't let this happen. Kris won't let this happen. None of us will let this happen," essentially. This reminds me of Peter, essentially. Okay, so next theory, the next mini theory, would be the theory behind the shadow mantles and the sky mantles. So, interestingly enough, when I was playing through chapter 2, I assumed that what was going to happen was that Sham was going to craft the shadow mantle for us. Sham was going to craft the shadow mantle so that we would have something to defend ourselves in like one of the final fights of the game. However, in chapter 3, if we fight the secret boss, we're just given the shadow mantle. Which is interesting because we're still going to craft something out of those shadow crystals, I presume. But what? Well, I've thought about this, and I've thought about these other collectible items you can get that, are kind of, it's kind of confusing why they're here. In every chapter, you can also get a glow shard. You can get a shadow crystal, but you can also get a glow shard. And these seem to be sort of the inverse of each other. People were discussing a file in the game called the Sky Mantle. And back then, a lot of people thought this was just like an in-game technical term for the Shadow Mantle. However, the thing is, Sky is often more so compared to heaven, where Shadow is more so often compared to like hell. Sky seems to be some sort of heavenly concept, right? Because it's the up there. So what if, in the final battle, we'll use this shadow mantle that we were just kind of given by the secret boss, but then we'll also craft a shadow mantle and a sky mantle, and we'll use the shadow mantle and sky mantle to fight either the knight or some other endgame boss that's gonna take a lot of gonna give us a lot of trouble if we don't have these mantles. Maybe. Another thing I want to discuss, and this might be weird, the character of Grandpa Semi. I think it's entirely possible that the mysterious figure who gives us eggs, if we find him, I think it is entirely possible this figure is actually Grandpa Semi. Let me explain. So, the secret bosses, or just a lot of characters in Deltarune, really, seem to mirror the characters in Undertale to some extent. Um, of course, Asgore and the King, they're pretty similar. Mettaton is very similar to both Tenna and Spamton. Gerson Boom is very similar to Undyne. And I thought about the characters of Sans and Papyrus. They were a duo, and like sort of a comedic duo. Like they sort of were foils to each other. Um, Sans was a very serious guy with a jokey exterior, and then Papyrus was a very silly guy with a serious exterior. They're kind of like polar opposites, and like they were both good guys, right? I mean, like Papyrus and Sans both had good intentions as far as they were trying to kill the player. Well, Papyrus was trying to get the player. Um, they were good good guys, good leaning guys by the end of the game. Um, I'm kind of wondering if in Deltarune we also have a duo of skeletons. Two skeletons who both fell into dark worlds and were lost to space and time. Grandpa Semi would be the very silly one, the very silly one who speaks in like sort of contradictory riddles, um, of there is something here, there is nothing here, sort of thing, and he gives us eggs as like sort of a thing, because people have pointed out the Eggman seems too silly to be Gaster. From the Valentine's Day card to the way he acts when he actually gets to talk to you in chapters 3 and 4, he's a bit too silly to be Gaster. So what if uh, these are just both characters now, and Gaster is gonna be like the final secret boss, and he's gonna be pulling strings in the background essentially. But Grandpa Semi instead is more so a pure figure who isn't necessarily upset that he was lost to space and time, but still appreciates the visitor every now and then whenever someone's able to find him. And he gives them eggs to remember him by. That that would be kind of interesting. Um, but I don't know that for certain, because I always assumed Gaster was just a reference to Grandpa Semi. I might as well explain some context behind Grandpa Semi. Grandpa Semi is a name you can find in like the Undertale notes. Like Toby Fox made notes when he was like working on Undertale, and one of the names you can find in that list of notes is Grandpa Semi. Um, I always just assumed that Gaster was inspired by the story of Grandpa Semi, but they could just be entirely different characters entirely in Deltarune, and they're both real, and they're both guys who fell into Dark Worlds. Possibly by the same experiment. Possibly. Um, and the picture of Tenna is just a picture of Tenna. Enjoy. Okay, but no, we're not done. Uh, I now want to discuss the last few secret bosses of the game. I want to try and discuss the last few secret bosses. So, we have 3 chapters left, which means we'll either have 3 or 2 boss fights left. Like 3 or 2 secret bosses. I would imagine 3. I would imagine each chapter would have a secret boss. I'm not certain though. I already discussed how I think Gaster being the final secret boss is the most likely option. However, we still have 2 more before him. I think it's very possible for Woody Theory to still be canon. Now, I'm not gonna put a lot of stake into this. I am not. However, it was mentioned in chapter 3 that so basically the shows that Tenna showed us were all sort of the family's favorite shows, right? So the cooking show was Toriel's favorite show. The rock show was the show that the kids looked into when Toriel wasn't around. Like if Toriel wasn't around, they'd try to watch the rock show. the monster movie one was like a Susie one, and this is kind of why this is the one you have to buy. This is sort of like the side one where you buy it. It's not really tied to the Dreamer family, but it is tied to Susie's love for TV and Tenna's appreciation for that, basically. Um, the fourth show is one we don't get to see. This is Asgore's favorite show. This is the cowboy show that he watched with Kris. This is the and I believe it is actually described of as a cowboy puppet show. So, let's say in the future the flower shop becomes a dark world. Wouldn't it make sense for Asgore to have like a little toy of one of the show characters in his house somewhere, in like his flower shop somewhere? What if the Dark Fountain gets made in the flower shop and Woody's here? What I would really love is if the image of like the flower living inside of Woody, what I would really like is if that turns out to be real. Like the flower is actually inside of Woody. Like there's a friend inside him. That would be cool. In this case, I think that the Woody secret boss, whatever boss it would be, if this is the case, would turn your soul purple, because Gerson Boom turned it green, right? So we've already had the green soul. Purple soul on strings, so like pull strings, flower vines, something like that. I feel like that makes sense. What would you do to make it interesting? I'd say maybe make the boss arena more grid-like, where like instead of moving from like the line instantly to the next line, you would instead have to follow like the path until you find like an intersecting line, like goes across to the next line, which goes across to the next line, and you gotta like find the correct sequence to move in across these lines to get it to work, basically, I guess. Also, when the Gaster fight happens, he will 100% turn your soul blue. If that doesn't happen, Toby Fox missed out. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Okay, I think that covers most of the things I wanted to discuss. This does kind of leave me with a question, though, who our final boss of the game is going to be. Because I am expecting these boss fights to take place towards the end of the game. Boss fight 1, I'm expecting that we, the player, are going to have to fight the Delta Warriors. I'm expecting that to happen at some point. Boss fight 2, I'm expecting, is the fight against Gaster. And I'm assuming this is going to be a secret boss. Although if we get to the end and he's like, oh, I'm Wing Gaster, I was behind everything, then, like, he could be the final boss. He could be the final boss of the weird route. Maybe the final example of the weird route is actually a good thing. Like, if you go along the normal path of Chapter 7, maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe you want to do the weird route of Chapter 7, and then Gaster will be the final boss. Gaster would be the final boss of the good ending. Maybe, maybe. I am expecting the fight against the Knight and his Roaring Titans. And if Carol Holiday is in fact the Roaring Bishop, the person on the phone, and the one who made Des into a Darkner, I'm expecting that will be a boss fight as well. However, with Carol being old and stuff like that, maybe not. I don't know. we'll see. I mean, really, just because she's old. Um, but you know, the final boss could literally just be against the three figures of the Roaring Delta. That could be possible. We will find out in the future chapters, but for now, that's sort of my scatterbrained theory video, I guess. This was not scripted like the other one was. Now I'm gonna say at the end of this video, and this goes for any theory videos I make. If you think you can present a better version of a theory I make, go right ahead. The solving the lore of this series needs to be a collaborative effort. So if you guys think you can, if you guys think you like some of the ideas I presented here and you wanted to flesh them out a bit more, maybe make them into a full theory video, that'd be great. I'd actually really like that. And the picture of Tenna is just a picture of Tenna. Enjoy.